Part 1 of 9. After the catastrophic loss of 7 warships and 2,000 sailors in just 5 days, the Navy Department's command made a final decision. It became clear that Greece, where fierce fighting was taking place, was lost. Admiral Cunningham carefully considered their decision. Immediately cease all evacuation operations. At that moment, thousands of Allied soldiers were in danger. They could be captured or face worse fates. Cunningham understood that his entire career and reputation were at risk, but he also recognized the importance of another principle. It takes 3 years to build a ship, but 300 years to build a tradition. Regardless of whether there was an air attack from the Luftwaffe or not, he was not going to abandon his men in distress. On May 31, 1941, the ship HMS Phoebe received an order that directly contradicted London's directives to turn back towards Crete. At that moment, nearly 10,000 soldiers were on the shore at Sfakia, but only a third of them, 3,500 men, could be accommodated on board. All participants in the evacuation understood perfectly that this was their last chance to leave Crete on the ship, a ship born in Scottish waters. In 1940, the HMS Phoebe was launched from the shipyard in Govan, on the banks of the River Clyde in Scotland. Its hull sliced through the cold waters of the strait like a knife. It was a Dido-class cruiser, over 156 meters long, exceeding the length of a football field. Its width was just over 15 meters, and its speed was about 60 kilometers per hour. The ship was designed for quick response and pinpoint strikes, not heavy defense. It had an elegant, graceful shape of a hunter rather than a mighty fighter. 8 133mm guns, mounted in twin turrets, proudly towered on its deck, weapons capable of destroying any target in its path. Additionally, it was armed with 2 quadruple 40mm anti-aircraft guns and 6 torpedo tubes with a diameter of 533mm. All this made it a formidable and agile vessel. On August 31, 1940, HMS Phoebe joined the Royal Navy. Initially, it served as part of the Home Fleet, patrolling the waters of the North Atlantic, off the rugged coast of Scapa Flow, located in the Orkney Islands archipelago. Constant drills and training in shooting and torpedo attacks became routine for the crew, while shore leave was a rare luxury. The crew hardened themselves against the constant threat from German raiders and submarines lurking beneath the water surface. For young Assistant Doctor Victor Chanter, who was on the ship for the first time, everything that was happening became a real lesson in survival. He treated everything, from seasickness to injuries sustained during storms and combat encounters. Part 2 of 9. The small ship's hospital ward became their only refuge, and seasickness was their constant companion. The entire crew obsessively stocked up on seasickness tablets, especially those from the Eastman Company, to reduce suffering and maintain combat readiness. In April of 1940, new orders arrived that once again changed the ship's course. It was urgently sent from the cold northern waters to the Mediterranean Sea, crossing the treacherous Strait of Pantalea, where enemy submarines lay in wait. The route then took them past Gibraltar, Freetown, Darban, Mombasa, and Aden, and afterward through the Suez Canal to the port of Alexandria. All of this occurred under conditions where every moment became critically important, and saving the lives of thousands required immediate and decisive action. On the night of April 27, 1941, when the situation reached a breaking point, Phoebe, along with several ships, including the destroyers Gromovrzec, Gerivard, and Goroi, became a true lifeline for those in danger. They organized a rescue operation during which everyone aboard the Dutch transport ship Costa Rica was saved. The ship carried everything, about 2,600 soldiers of various nationalities, as well as the entire crew. These people found themselves in a deadly trap, and ships like Gromovrzec, Gerivard, and Goroi were the ones taking on board the wounded, exhausted, and frightened individuals, trying to evacuate them from the danger zone. By the time these rescue operations were underway, the ship Calcutta, another member of the Dido class, was sailing alongside its sister ships, one of the first to engage in the fight for the lives and safety of the evacuees. This ship led a group of vessels that managed to rescue 960 soldiers from the city of Nauplia, with its artillery powerfully repelling attacks from German aircraft, creating an almost impenetrable shield against the constant raids on the convoys. At this moment, when the situation seemed hopeless, Calcutta and its sister ships continued to perform their duties, despite the danger and the risk of being shot down. Phoebe then made 3 night voyages from the mainland Greece area, dangerous and extremely difficult. She transported troops from the southern coast of Kalamata, where every minute could be the last. During these nights, her boats transformed into fast assault craft, risking German fire to pick up tired, wounded, and exhausted soldiers. These ships became the only link between the rescued and the rescuers, and each such operation was a reminder of how fragile life was at that moment. Part 3 of 9. In the ship's medical section, where Victor Chanter was located, a true crucifixion was taking place. He saw terrible wounds on the injured, some of them so severe that they could barely crawl. These scenes remained in his memory forever, for he understood that each saved life was a victory, and each loss was the price paid for hope. At this time, thousands of Allied troops, British, Australian, and New Zealanders, found themselves in a hopeless situation. They were forced to retreat, exhausted and drained, leaving behind destroyed positions and dusty roads. Their food supplies were running out, ammunition was dwindling, and morale, it seemed, was on the verge of collapse, yet it had not been completely broken. Many of those rescued by Phoebe and Calcutta from Greece were later taken to Crete. There they faced a new danger because the Germans had begun a new phase of their operation, a large-scale airborne assault that started with paratroopers landing straight from the sky. This plan was the boldest and most dangerous, as Hitler aimed to completely seize this vital strategic point in the Mediterranean. The Germans poured all their forces into this capture, and their assault was so fierce that the defenders, faced with difficult conditions, were forced to retreat across the mountainous and rugged terrain to the southern part of the island. Key commanders, including Major General E.S. Weston and his senior associates, among them the 4th and 5th New Zealand Brigades, took on the main role in the arduous and painful retreat to the sea. They had to organize the defense and ensure the safe evacuation of the remaining units. Following them, the 20th Australian Brigade and a Royal Marine Battalion moved, tracking closely behind, trying to stay as close as possible and protect the retreating units. At that time, commanders believed that the entire army could be evacuated before nightfall on May 30th, hoping to complete the rescue quickly. However, the situation developed differently. The Germans did not stop and continued their advance, persistently pressing against the Allied positions. By noon, the 23rd New Zealand Battalion was in a very difficult position. It was at the northern entrance to the Ascafou Plain, where German mountain riflemen, with brutal precision, unleashed a hail of Mauser fire, echoing off the rocky slopes. These soldiers, seemingly frozen in defense, held their position at a narrow pass, protecting the road that ran through a narrow mountain corridor. Their Bren machine guns kept firing, while Lee Enfield rifles sent volleys toward the advancing Germans, demonstrating resilience and determination. The German mountain units, sleek and well-prepared, seemed to stretch a line of dust across the rocky ground, striking the enemy with their light weapons, while waves of attackers assaulted their positions. In the air, mortar shells whistled and exploded, tearing up the earth and sending geysers of stones and mud into the sky. Allied forces bravely repelled each new attack, their numbers dwindling and their ammunition running low with each passing hour. Ultimately, under the cover of their own fire, they conducted a heavy and painful retreat, leaving their positions slightly to the side, but maintaining their combat capability. They withdrew to the 5th Brigade, located near Komitades, just 5 kilometers from Slovakia, while German troops continued their relentless pursuit. At the same time, far to the east, a separate scene was unfolding. An attempt to evacuate their forces was underway at the garrison of Heraklion. There, under the cover of night, a naval convoy consisting of 2 cruisers and 6 destroyers, including the destroyer Calcutta, which had long proven itself in dangerous missions and combat operations, set out from the Egyptian coast. They managed to evacuate nearly 4,000 British soldiers from the clutches of German forces, cramming them into any available space on the ships. However, the rescue operation was short-lived. On the way back to Alexandria, the ships were delayed, and this delay played a cruel joke. German aircraft discovered and attacked the convoy, dropping bombs and opening fire with guns. As a result, many of the rescued soldiers lost their lives in the sea, unable to reach safe land in time. The dawn of May 30th, marked by sunrise, brought no respite. German mountain troops continued their advance towards Sfakia, persistently closing in despite fatigue and losses. Throughout the night, they followed the retreating Allies, aiming to seize the plain of Askifu before engaging in battle near the nearby island of Imbros. This island was only 16 kilometers from the coast where the evacuation was taking place. In this tense moment, the Australian 27 Battalion occupied a very important position. Its soldiers formed a thin line of defense. They held the road, trying to prevent German forces from flanking them, while the commander then moved higher, holding a Bren gun in his hands with two soldiers armed with rifles walking beside him. He lowered himself to a low position, gently placing his finger on the trigger, and carefully watched the approaching enemy, who was slowly drawing nearer. Their silhouettes became clearer and more distinct with each cautious step, as if the enemy itself was advancing with invisible, intangible reach. Tense silence hung in the air, and he held his breath, waiting for the enemies to fully reveal themselves. At about 500 yards, he gave the command, and the Bren gun shattered the silence, unleashing a powerful burst that tore through the enemy ranks and caused them to panic and flee. Approximately 2 hours had passed since he began his ascent, and on the same day, his platoon returned to deliver an important message. All 22 enemy soldiers had been destroyed. For this act of bravery, as well as for the previously demonstrated courage and determination in the battles in Crete, Captain Charles Upham was awarded the highest military honor, the Victoria Cross. However, bravery and valor alone were not enough to ensure the delivery of ships capable of evacuating thousands of stranded people on Crete. The masters of the situation, generals and commanders, faced a painful choice, as each of the 4 ships waiting after nightfall could only carry 500 people. 4th and 5th Brigades were selected to go out to sea in order to save as many soldiers as possible. But due to limited capacity, not all of the 5th Brigade could board the ships, and Brigade Commander Brigadier James Hargis was forced to make a difficult decision. The 21st Battalion remained on shore because it could not be included in the evacuation group. At the same time, the 18th Battalion received orders to organize a defensive perimeter around the beach to protect the remaining personnel and prepare them for evacuation. Suddenly, even worse news arrived from Alexandria. Due to the threat of air attacks and the dense crowd on the ships, the evacuation was reduced to only 250 people per ship. This meant that for the soldiers of the 5th Brigade, another night of suffering and fear on Crete had begun. The situation worsened further because, due to breakdowns and damage from bombings, only 2 ships arrived at the pier. Nevertheless, that night about 1,500 people managed to board, as the entire 4th Brigade, despite the danger, crossed the guarded perimeter, where people who had lost their units begged for rescue. At that moment, the situation became so dire that the column commander, Colonel Kippenberger, was overwhelmed with deep shame and disappointment. In the darkness, as the night grew thicker, amphibious planes of the Sunderland type managed to evacuate Freiburg and other high-ranking officers, leaving thousands of soldiers and civilians on the ground to face the approaching German engines and the sounds of falling bombs. At dawn on May 31st, the ships Forez and Gambelsraz sailed over Sfakia and saw that about 9,000 Allied soldiers had taken refuge in and around the village, hoping for rescue and believing they still had a chance to escape. In Alexandria, General Wavell faced harsh truths. Losses at sea were increasing, ships were damaged and sunk, and German air attacks never ceased for a minute. This compelled him to make a fateful decision. The evacuation that night had to be the last. Initially, only 4 ships were allocated to save as many people as possible, as there were very many. But then, from afar, from the Mediterranean Sea, a desperate voice was heard demanding continuation. He did not just appeal to the admiral with a request. He persistently pleaded, argued, and demanded that as much as possible be done for his stranded comrades on the island. Cunningham found himself faced with a very difficult choice, as strict and clear orders had been issued from the Admiralty in London to cease rescue operations because the losses were becoming too great and could no longer be justified. However, Fraser's passionate appeal, his sincere words, and his urgent plea managed to overcome exhaustion and strategic considerations that were prevailing. The admiral had already lost several ships, and his heart ached for each remaining man in the fight, for everyone still battling. He declared, "It takes 3 years to build a ship, and 300 years to build a tradition." This phrase became a symbol of his determination and resilience. Despite all rational arguments and direct orders, Cunningham gave the command to turn back toward Crete with the ship Phoebe, which was already battered by battles and fighting for its life. It was a desperate final run, with a crew exhausted to the limit, and the chances of survival were very slim. Darkness enveloped Crete as Phoebe cut through the waves on its desperate return to Sfakia. The ship's captain, Guy Grantam, addressed the crew over the loudspeaker, warning of the harsh realities of the upcoming operation, the evacuation of remaining soldiers from Greece and Crete. His words were filled with grim caution. "This will be difficult." Every sailor understood that this was a dangerous and likely final voyage for many of them. They were heading into danger, facing the German Luftwaffe and the enemy fleet to rescue soldiers stranded on the island. The risk was highest, and everyone knew that the outcome could turn out very differently. As the ships, like ghosts, silently entered Sfakia Bay in the dead of night, without navigation lights and guided only by Lieutenant Lambsden's skill, chaos was beginning on the shore. There on the sand, thousands of people gathered, their faces exhausted, full of fear and despair. News spread that this was the last night when there was a chance to evacuate about 3,500 people. Only a small fraction of those still held captive on the island. Priority was mainly given to the infantry units that had borne the brunt of the German assault, the 5th and 19th Brigades, as well as a battalion of British Royal Marines. To prevent panic and chaos that could jeopardize the entire operation, the commanders made the difficult decision to establish another guarded perimeter to control the flow of people. This perimeter held back the remaining individuals while Colonel Howard Kippenberger, commanding the 20th Brigade, approached the shore, passing by soldiers pleading or staring into nothing. He later recalled that he was ordered to open fire on anyone attempting to break through the line and reach the ship. On board Phoebe at that moment were nearly 4,000 people, including 80 wounded who could walk unaided. People filled the decks to capacity, creating a living carpet of bodies while sailors struggled against the waves and their own anxiety, helping people to board the ship. Excitement and relief flooded those who managed to leave the island, but at the same time, a bitter sense of loss and regret overwhelmed them for those who remained on the shore to face their inevitable fate. Many comrades were left behind, and their destiny hung in the balance. The crew of the Phoebe, including Vic Chanter, watched the streams of tired, exhausted faces boarding the ship, feeling the waves in fear beyond the horizon, beyond the line of the sea wave. Slowly, the silhouettes of ships swayed in the dark waters of the Mediterranean, like heavy, sluggish phantoms lost in the depths. These ships, overloaded with people and cargo, were easy targets for enemy aircraft and submarines, which were already hunting them in these dangerous waters. When the last of the exhausted soldiers, worn out and drained, climbed aboard, 2 British ships, Fiona and Abdul, moved away from the coast of Crete, awakening in the darkness of early morning. They were loaded with thousands of people, soldiers beginning their perilous and risky crossing of the Mediterranean Sea. Each knot of speed felt like a roll of the dice, as the inevitable dawn was already looming on the horizon. Officers on the bridge stared intently into the dark distance, trying to spot even the slightest signs of danger. And then dawn broke. It revealed before the sailors tiny, barely visible silhouettes of ships scattered across the vast surface of the water. Almost immediately, planes appeared in the sky. Junkers of the 12th and Stukas dive bombers. Their engines roared as if from afar, as they rapidly dived downward, targeting the ships. The sky filled with the figures of planes plunging in well-coordinated attacks. In Vic Chanter's memory, it was forever etched how the blue sky suddenly turned black, with clouds of explosions and fire, flashes of flames, splashing water, and falling bombs flying straight into the sea. The enemies attacked the ships relentlessly, and they, like wild beasts, writhed, dodging deadly strikes. One of the Stukas suddenly pulled up, diving toward the stern of the Phoebe, while Captain Grantham loudly issued orders, and the steering wheel turned, causing the massive ship to list sharply to the right. Water around exploded into powerful fountains as bombs hit the sea. People on the decks clung to any supports to avoid being thrown overboard, as the ship shuddered and creaked under the assault. Despite their exhaustion, the crew continued to fight. Their anti-aircraft guns fired volleys loudly, and captains, risking everything, maneuvered the ships, performing dizzying turns to evade direct hits. In the end, the ships, though scattered and mixed, kept moving and fighting despite the enemy's superiority, creating a chaotic but still combat-ready fleet on the sea. Returning to Alexandria, a quiet, tense night began. On this early morning, in the dim light, Prime Minister of New Zealand, Peter Fraser, and Admiral Cummings stood on the dock. They carefully gazed at the horizon, hoping for the appearance of their ships, especially the Phoebe and other vessels involved in their risky and lengthy night operation. Their hope gradually became a reality. After a long and dangerous journey, under constant threat from the enemy, the convoy finally reached the Egyptian coast. Relief swept over everyone, soldiers and sailors alike, for thousands of fighters who had fought for their lives and fragile health for several days without rest or nourishment were finally able to step onto solid ground. The ships, including the Phoebe, had barely had time to recharge and recover after heavy fighting and a long pause lasting just over 15 or 20 hours across 4 exhausting days. Nevertheless, the feeling of calm and relief was very short-lived. Their most important task was to successfully deliver the cargo. About 100 nautical miles from the safe zone, her Type C hull cut through the waves of the Mediterranean Sea. Suddenly, the horizon lit up with the roar of German Junkers 88 aircraft. The Luftwaffe fighters rapidly broke through scattered clouds, their twin-engine bombers rushing toward the converted combat air defense cruiser, which, like a living creature, turned its guns upward, firing tracers into the blue sky above the sea surface. The enemy did not miss twice. The first shock wave tore through the forward compartments of the ship, while the second struck amidships, creating large holes in the hull and causing a flood of seawater to pour into its compartments. The crew of the Calcutta, composed of experienced sailors, fought the flooding, trying to stop the flow of water, but all was in vain. The Mediterranean claimed another victim. The cruiser began to list to starboard, its superstructure disappeared beneath the waves, and rescue ships, including the HMS Coventry, hurried to aid its sailors. The outcome was clear in the records of the Naval Department. 2 officers and 116 ratings were killed, while 33 officers and 232 sailors were rescued from the water. Their rescue was only a small mercy compared to the catastrophe. The sinking of the Calcutta sharply reminded everyone that even victory often comes at a high cost. The loss of this battle cruiser, with its rich combat history, played a significant role in the Admiralty's decision to cease further evacuations from the island. The total number of evacuees from Crete and Greece was quite high. Between 16,500 and 18,000 people were evacuated from Crete and up to 50,000 from mainland Greece. But this victory was achieved at the cost of incredible sacrifices. The grave for British cruisers became this battle. 7 warships and merchant vessels were lost, and around 2,000 sailors perished in the fighting. Despite such heavy losses, a deep gratitude was born in people's hearts. A grand celebration took place in Alexandria, organized by the New Zealand Army, part of which was a solemn rally aboard the ship Phoebe. Admiral Cunningham raised his flag on her mast, becoming a powerful symbol of unbreakable bonds and unity. Representatives of the New Zealand Army presented a substantial fund to support the families of the fallen Royal Navy sailors. Their speeches were filled with words of sincere appreciation. When we retreated to the shores, we didn't worry much. We knew the fleet would always be there, and our hopes were fulfilled. These simple words became the voice of many lives saved from death. After the events in Crete, Phoebe did not find the strength to rest. She once again plunged into the harsh realities of the Mediterranean Sea, joining the Tobruk convoy, escorting cargo ships along the Libyan coast. On August 27, 1941, during a routine voyage, an Italian torpedo bomber struck her. A powerful torpedo salvo created a huge hole in the hull below the bridge. The hole was 18 meters long and extended down to the keel, large enough to fit a double-decker bus. Despite everything, Phoebe did not surrender. Her watertight compartments held back the water, and the crew, demonstrating exceptional ingenuity and bravery, threw overboard 3 torpedoes, an anchor, and a motorboat to reduce pressure and minimize damage. Slowly but surely, she made her way to Alexandria for temporary repairs.